I was standing in my study with $2 million in cash, ready to save my son's life. Then my maid walked in and said 5 words that shattered my world. "Ma'am, it's all a lie." My hands were on that duffel bag. $2 million. Small bills just like they demanded. My son's life, they said. Pay or he dies. And I was ready to pay. God knows I was ready to give everything. But those 5 words from Ngozi stopped my heart faster than any ransom call ever could. Because what she was about to tell me was worse than any kidnapping. It was betrayal from the person I loved most in this world. My name is Amara Okafor. I'm 62 years old, and I built a billion-dollar oil empire from absolutely nothing. But before I tell you about how my own son tried to destroy me, you need to understand how I got here. You need to understand what I sacrificed, what I lost, and why his betrayal cut deeper than any business deal gone wrong, any hostile takeover, any bankruptcy threat I ever faced. I was 32 years old when my world ended the first time. My husband, Chaik, was the love of my life. We met at university in Port Harcourt. He was studying engineering, I was studying business. He used to joke that I was too ambitious for my own good, that I'd probably end up running the country one day. I'd laugh and tell him I just wanted enough to be comfortable, to give our future children a good life. We got married at 25. Had our son, Ezekiel, when I was 29. We called him Zeke. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and his father's smile. Chaik worked at a refinery. Middle management. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We had plans. We were going to buy a bigger house. Maybe start a small business together. Simple dreams. The kind of dreams young couples have when they think they have all the time in the world. But we didn't have time. When Zeke was 3 years old, there was an accident at the refinery. An explosion. Chaik was doing a routine inspection. He died instantly, they told me. Like that was supposed to be a comfort. Like knowing he didn't suffer was supposed to make it hurt less when I had to explain to our 3-year-old son why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. They gave me a payout. It should have been enough to survive on while I figured out what to do next. But Chaik had debts I didn't know about. Business investments that had gone wrong. Loans he'd taken out trying to start something on the side to give us a better life. By the time the lawyers and creditors were done, I had nothing. Less than nothing. I had a toddler, a rented apartment I could barely afford, and a choice to make. I could have gone back to my family. Admitted defeat. Raised Zeke on handouts and sympathy. Or I could fight. Chose to fight. I took the little bit of knowledge Chaik had shared with me about the oil industry and I started asking questions. I started making calls. I started showing up at offices where I wasn't wanted. Asking for meetings with men who didn't want to meet with me. Widow. Woman. Black. Young. Desperate. Everything they loved to dismiss. But I learned something in those early days. Desperation makes you fearless. When you've already lost everything, you've got nothing left to lose. So I pushed. I learned. I found a small investor who took a chance on me, probably because he thought he could take advantage of me later. I started Okafor Energy Corporation with 1 truck and 1 contract. 1 single contract to transport oil products for a small firm. The next 30 years of my life were a blur. 10-hour days. Sometimes 20. I missed everything. I missed Zeke's first day of school because I was in Abuja negotiating a contract. I missed his 10th birthday because I was in London trying to secure international partnerships. I missed his football games, his award ceremonies, his graduations. I hired nannies. Good ones. Expensive ones. But they weren't his mother. And I knew it. God, I knew it every single day. But I told myself it was worth it. Because every contract I signed, every deal I closed, every million I made, that was security for Zeke. That was his future. His inheritance. I was building something that would outlast me. Something that would mean my son would never know poverty the way I'd known it after his father died. He'd never have to fight the way I fought. He'd never have to prove himself to rooms full of men who wanted him to fail. I built Okafor Energy Corporation into one of the largest independent oil companies in West Africa. I have refineries, distribution networks, partnerships across 3 continents. I've been on Forbes lists. I've sat across from presidents and prime ministers. I've made decisions that affected thousands of jobs, millions of lives. But every single night when I sat alone in my house, I looked at the photograph of Chike on my desk and I wondered if he'd be proud of me. Or if he'd tell me I'd lost sight of what really mattered. Everything I built for Zeke. My only child. My only family. The last piece of Chike I had left in this world. But somewhere along the way I created a monster instead of a man. Zeke is 33 years old now. And he has never worked a single day in his life. Not one day. He lives in a penthouse in Ikoyi that costs more per month than most people make in a year. He drives a different luxury car every few months. Last time I checked, he had a Mercedes G-Wagon, a Range Rover Sport, and some Italian thing I can't even pronounce. He wears clothes with designer labels I have to Google to understand the hype. He goes to clubs where a single bottle of champagne costs what some families spend on school fees for an entire year. And I paid for all of it. Every single naira. Because I told myself he deserved it. He deserved the life I couldn't give him when he was young. He deserved to enjoy the empire I'd built. What was the point of having all this money if I couldn't share it with my son? But Zeke didn't just enjoy the money. He became addicted to it. Dependent on it. Entitled to it. He didn't see my success as something I'd earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. He saw it as his birthright, something he was owed simply for existing. And his friends made it worse. Chisholm, Dubum, and Kola. The three of them had been hanging around Zeke since his early 20s. Chisholm was the calculated one. Smooth talker. Always had some investment opportunity, some business idea that just needed capital to take off. He wore expensive watches and spoke in that peculiar way that people do when they want you to think they're smarter than they are. Dubum was the wild one. The party animal. Always knew which club was opening, which artist was performing, where the real players were spending their money. Kola was the follower. Quiet, always agreeing, always there but never really present. Just riding the wave of Zeke's money and lifestyle. I never trusted them. Not once. There was something in their eyes when they looked at me. Not respect. Not even fake respect. Just calculation. Like they were always measuring, always assessing what they could get. But every time I tried to say something to Zeke about them, he'd get defensive. He'd tell me I was being paranoid. That I didn't understand friendship because I'd spent my whole life caring more about business than people. It hurt. But I let it go. Because I didn't want to push my son away. I'd already been absent for so much of his life. I didn't want to lose what little connection we had left. 2 weeks before the kidnapping, Zeke came to my house. My real house, not the penthouse I was paying for. He came into my office, the same study where I'd spent countless nights working, planning, building. He sat down across from me with that look on his face. The look that meant he wanted something. He told me he had an opportunity. A cryptocurrency investment. His friends, Chisholm specifically, had connected him with some people who were getting in early on the next big thing. They just needed $5 million to secure their position. $5 million. And the returns would be astronomical. We'd triple the investment in 6 months, he said. Maybe more. I asked him the questions I'd ask anyone pitching me an investment. Who are these people? What's the track record? What's the actual technology behind the cryptocurrency? Where's the white paper? What are the risks? Basic due diligence. Business 101. He couldn't answer a single question. He got frustrated. Started talking faster, getting defensive. This was a sure thing. His friends had vetted it. Did I not trust him? Did I not believe in him? Why was I always treating him like a child instead of a partner? That's when I said no. For the first time in his adult life, I said no to something substantial. I'd said no to small things before. No, you can't buy a third car this year. No, you can't take 15 friends to Dubai on my credit card. But this was different. This was $5 million. And this was me finally seeing clearly. Finally admitting that I'd been enabling him. That I'd been buying his affection instead of earning his respect. I told him I wouldn't give him the money. That if he wanted to invest, He needed to earn the capital himself. Get a job. Build something. Prove he could manage money before I handed him millions to gamble with. He exploded. Stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over. Started yelling about how I'd never supported him. How I'd abandoned him as a child to build my precious empire, and now I was hoarding the money I'd made off his loneliness. He said I cared more about my business than I ever cared about him. That I'd rather watch my money sit in accounts than help my own son. Then he said the thing that broke my heart. He looked at me with such contempt, such genuine hatred, and he said, "You'd rather hoard your money than help your own son. You've always cared more about your business than me." He walked out. Slammed the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. It was a photo of him as a little boy, sitting on Chike's shoulders, both of them laughing. The glass cracked right down the middle. I sat there in my study for hours after he left. Just sat there in the dark, asking myself if he was right. Had I been a terrible mother? Had I sacrificed my son's emotional well-being for financial security? Had I been so focused on giving him everything that I'd given him nothing that really mattered? I didn't know. I still don't know. But what I do know is that 3 days later I got a phone call that changed everything. A phone call that made me realize my son wasn't just entitled and spoiled. He was something far worse than I ever imagined. Before I continue with what happened next, I need to ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so much that you were willing to give them everything, even when you knew deep down they didn't deserve it? Have you ever sacrificed so much for someone that you lost yourself in the process? Drop your answer in the comments below, because what I'm about to tell you next will make you question everything you think you know about unconditional love. And if you're invested in this story, if you want to know how my maid's 5 words changed everything, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next is going to show you that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones capable of hurting us the most. 3 days after that argument, my phone rang at 11:47 at night. I remember the exact time because I was still in my office, going through quarterly reports. I've always been a night person. Sleep felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, even after all these years. Even after building everything I dreamed of. The number on my screen was unknown. I almost didn't answer. I get dozens of calls from unknown numbers every week. Journalists, people looking for donations, scammers. But something made me pick up that night. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Maybe God was giving me one last chance to see the truth before I destroyed myself trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. Answered. And the voice that came through the phone was distorted. Mechanical. Like something out of a movie. Cold. Terrifying in its calmness. "We have your son. If you want to see him alive, it will cost you." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense. They were just sounds. My brain couldn't process them. "We have your son. Your son. Ngozi." The baby I'd held in my arms 33 years ago. The little boy who used to wait by the window for me to come home from work. The teenager who'd stopped waiting. The man who'd walked out of my study 3 days ago saying I cared more about money than him. Then the terror hit. Real physical terror. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I've sat across from some of the most powerful, most dangerous men in the oil industry. I've had people threaten my business, threaten my reputation, threaten everything I'd built. But nothing in my entire life had prepared me for this moment. Because this wasn't about money or power or business. This was about the only person in the world I truly loved. The only family I had left. I managed to speak. My voice came out hoarse, broken. Asked who they were. What they wanted. Zeke was okay. The questions tumbled out in a desperate rush. And the voice just waited. Patient. Like they had all the time in the world. Like my panic was entertaining to them. Then they told me what they wanted. $2 million. Small bills. Unmarked. I had 48 hours. 48 hours to get the money together, or I'd never see my son again. $2 million. To some people that's an impossible amount. A lifetime of earnings. But to me, to someone who'd built a $1 billion empire, $2 million was nothing. Pocket change. I would have paid 20 million, 50 million. Everything in my accounts if that's what they'd asked for. I started saying yes immediately. Yes, I'll get the money. Yes, I'll do whatever you want. Yes, just please don't hurt him. Just please let me talk to him. Just please tell me he's alive. And that's when they put him on the phone. Mom! Zeke's voice. But not the Zeke who'd yelled at me 3 days ago. Not the entitled, angry man who'd accused me of hoarding money and being a terrible mother. This was a voice I hadn't heard in years. Decades maybe. This was the voice of a terrified child. Broken. Desperate. Crying. Mom, please. Please, they're going to kill me. They have guns. They're serious. Mom, please, I'm so sorry about what I said. I didn't mean it. Please just do what they say. Please. I don't want to die. Mom, please. He was sobbing. Actually sobbing. I could hear the fear in every word, every breath. And something inside me shattered. All the anger I'd felt after our argument, all the disappointment, all the frustration at who he'd become, it all just evaporated. Because in that moment, he wasn't a 33-year-old man who'd never worked a day in his life. He wasn't the spoiled child I'd created through my own guilt and absence. He was just my son. My baby. And he was in danger. I was crying too now. Telling him it would be okay. That I'd get the money. That I'd do whatever they wanted. That he just needed to stay strong. That mommy was going to bring him home. Called him baby. I hadn't called him that since he was little. Since before Chaik died. Since before I became Amara Okafor, oil baroness, instead of just Amara, someone's wife, someone's mother. Then the distorted voice came back on the line. Cold again. Mechanical. Like Zeke's terror meant nothing to them. Like my anguish was just background noise. They gave me the rules. No police. No security. No private investigators. They were watching me. They had people everywhere. If I told anyone, if I tried anything, Zeke would die. They'd know. They'd kill him immediately, and I'd never even find his body. Did I understand? Did I understand what would happen if I didn't follow instructions exactly? Understood. God help me, I understood. I would have agreed to anything in that moment. They could have asked me to walk into the ocean and I would have done it if it meant getting Zeke back safely. The call ended. Just like that. Dial tone. I sat there in my office, phone still pressed to my ear, and I realized I was shaking all over. Not just my hands now. My entire body. Couldn't control it. I tried to stand up and my legs nearly gave out. I had to grab the edge of my desk to keep from falling. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals. I've sat in boardrooms full of men who wanted to intimidate me, who underestimated me, who tried to destroy me. I've faced hostile takeovers and market crashes and government investigations. I've been threatened, dismissed, insulted, and challenged at every single turn of my career. But nothing had ever made me feel like this. Nothing had ever reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart until I thought it would stop beating. Because all those other battles were about business. About money. About power. Things that could be rebuilt, regained, renegotiated. But this was about my child. My only child. The last piece of my husband left in this world. And if I failed, if I made one wrong move, I would lose him forever. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. Longer than the months after Chaik died when I didn't know how I'd survive. Longer than the years of building my company when I worked myself to exhaustion every single day. Longer than any nightmare I'd ever experienced. I didn't sleep. Not for 1 minute. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Zeke's face. Not the man he was now, but the boy he used to be. 3 years old, asking when Daddy was coming home. 7 years old, making me a Mother's Day card at school with crayons and glitter. 12 years old, trying to pretend he didn't care that I'd missed another football game. 17 years old, going to his secondary school graduation while I was in London. And the look on his face in the photographs when he scanned the crowd and didn't find me there. I sat in Chaik's old study. I'd kept it exactly as he left it the morning he went to work and never came home. His books were still on the shelves. His reading glasses on the desk. His favorite pen, the one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, still in the holder. Sometimes I'd come in here late at night and just sit in his chair, trying to feel close to him, trying to ask him for guidance, trying to remember what it felt like to not be alone. That night, I sat there with his photograph in my hands. It was from our wedding day. He looked so young, so happy, so alive. I talked to him like I used to. Asked him what I should do. Asked him if this was my fault. Asked him if he'd be ashamed of the mother I'd become. Asked him to please help me save our son. The kidnappers called twice more over those 48 hours. Proof of life, they called it. Each time they put Zeke on the phone for just a few seconds. Each time he sounded worse. More desperate. More terrified. More broken. He begged me to hurry. Begged me not to involve the police. Begged me to just pay them so he could come home. He told me he loved me. He hadn't said that in years. Not since he was a teenager. And hearing it now, under these circumstances, it destroyed me all over again. I started gathering the money immediately after that first call. $2 million in small bills isn't something you can just withdraw from one account without raising red flags. So I had to be strategic. I pulled from different accounts, different banks. I liquidated some bonds, sold some stocks. Nothing too large from any single source. Nothing that would trigger automatic reports or suspicious activity alerts. I told my accountants I was making some personal investments that required cash. They didn't question it. When you're a billionaire, people don't question your financial decisions. They just execute them. But someone noticed something was wrong. Mr. Adeli, my head of security. He'd been with me for 15 years. Former military. Sharp eyes. Sharper instincts. He came to my office on the second day and asked if everything was all right. He'd noticed I hadn't left the house. Noticed I looked exhausted. Noticed the unusual financial transactions. I lied to him. Told him everything was fine. Just dealing with some personal matters. Some family things. He looked at me with those sharp eyes and I could tell he didn't believe me. But I couldn't tell him the truth. The kidnappers had been clear. No police. No security. They were watching. And I couldn't risk Zeke's life on the chance that Mr. Adeli could help. What if they saw him getting involved? What if they had people watching my house, my office, my accounts? What if they killed Zeke because I couldn't follow simple instructions? So I sent Mr. Adeli away. Told him firmly that I didn't need his help. That I needed him to give me space. He left, but I could see the concern on his face. The suspicion. He knew something was very wrong. But he also knew better than to push me when I'd made up my mind. Those 48 hours were torture in ways I can't fully describe. Because it wasn't just the fear. It wasn't just the terror of potentially losing my son. It was the guilt. The crushing, suffocating guilt that maybe this was all my fault. Maybe if I hadn't said no to the $5 million, none of this would be happening. Maybe if I'd been a better mother, if I'd chosen him over my career, if I'd been there for his childhood instead of building an empire, he wouldn't have ended up in this situation. The guilt ate at me like acid. I kept thinking about all the moments I'd missed. His first day of school and I was in Abuja negotiating a contract. His 10th birthday and I was in London meeting with potential investors. His football games, his award ceremonies, his graduations. Always another meeting. Always another deal. Always another crisis that needed my attention more than my son did. I remembered this one time when he was maybe 8 or 9 years old. He'd asked me to help him with a school project about careers. He wanted to present what his parents did for work. And I'd been so busy, so distracted, that I just handed him a brochure from my company and told him to use that. I didn't sit down with him. Didn't explain what I did or why I did it. Didn't make it special or personal. Just gave him a corporate brochure like he was a potential investor instead of my child. I remembered another time, he must have been 12 or 13. He'd made the school football team. He was so excited when he called to tell me. Talking so fast, so happy. He asked if I'd come to the first game. And I'd said yes. Promised. But the day of the game, there was a problem at one of the refineries. Nothing catastrophic, but it needed my attention. I told myself the game would be just one of many, that there would be other opportunities. So I went to deal with the refinery problem and I missed the game. Zeke never asked me to come to another game after that. He stopped telling me about football altogether. And I told myself it was fine. That he understood. That he was growing up and didn't need his mother at every event. But the truth was, I'd broken something between us that day. I'd shown him that a work problem I could have delegated to someone else was more important than keeping a promise to him. And he'd learned the lesson I'd been teaching him his whole life. That he would always come second to my business. Sitting in Chaik's study during those 48 hours, reliving all these memories, all these failures, I started to think that maybe I deserved this pain. Maybe this was karma. Maybe this was the universe's way of showing me the cost of my choices. I'd sacrificed my relationship with my son to build financial security for him. And now someone was taking that financial security away to hurt the son I barely knew anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 30 years making money so Zeke would never struggle. And now that money was the reason he was in danger. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. I thought someone had targeted him because he was Amara Okafor's son. Because he was connected to wealth. I thought his lifestyle, his cars, his penthouse, his visible displays of money had made him a target. And whose fault was that? I was the one who'd given him unlimited access to wealth he hadn't earned. I was the one who'd created a life for him that made him a walking target for criminals. The guilt was overwhelming. More than once during those 48 hours, I thought about the argument we'd had. About him saying I cared more about my business than him. About me saying no to the $5 million. And I thought if I'd just said yes, if I'd just given him the money, he wouldn't have been angry. He wouldn't have left my house in that state. And maybe, somehow, that would have changed what happened next. Maybe the kidnappers had been watching him, waiting for the right moment, and they'd chosen that moment because they could sense his anger, his vulnerability. I know that doesn't make logical sense. But grief and guilt don't follow logic. They twist everything. They make you believe that somehow, someway, you could have prevented the unpreventable if you just made different choices. On the morning of the ransom exchange, I got the final call. Same distorted voice. Same cold, mechanical tone. They gave me the location. An abandoned warehouse in Apapa. Anyone who knows Lagos knows Apapa. Industrial area. Lots of abandoned buildings. Lots of places where bad things can happen without witnesses. They told me to come alone. 6 p.m. exactly. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Bring the money in a duffel bag. Come to the front entrance. Wait for further instructions. And then they warned me one more time. No police. No security. No tricks. They'd be watching. If they saw anyone else, if they suspected anything, Zeke would die. Did I understand? Did I understand that his life depended on me following instructions exactly? Understood. I'd understood from the first phone call. There was no universe in which I would do anything to risk Zeke's life. He could hate me. He could think I was a terrible mother. He could resent me for the rest of his life. But he would be alive. That was all that mattered. I packed the money in a large black duffel bag in my study. $2 million. Do you know what $2 million in small bills looks like? It's heavy. Shockingly heavy. I'm not a weak woman. I've always taken care of myself, stayed active, stayed strong. But lifting that bag, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. Each stack of bills represented something different to me. That stack there, that was from the first major contract I'd ever secured. That one was from the year I finally broke into the international market. That one was from the refineries I'd built from nothing. Every naira in that bag represented hours of work, days of negotiation, years of sacrifice. But as I packed it, I realized something. None of it mattered. Not one naira mattered if it couldn't bring my son home safely. I'd spent 30 years building wealth, building security, building something that would last. And in that moment, packing a duffel bag full of cash to save my son's life, I understood that all the wealth in the world meant nothing if you didn't have people you loved to share it with. What was the point of being a billionaire if I was going to end up alone? What was the point of an empire if there was no one to inherit it? Not because they died, but because I'd lost them through my own choices. Part of me, a small broken part of me, thought about the $5 million. About our argument. About me saying no. And I wondered if I should have just said yes. If I'd given him the money, he'd have been happy. He wouldn't have left angry. And maybe, just maybe, things would have been different. Maybe he wouldn't be in this situation. Maybe I'd bought $2 million worth of regret by refusing to give him $5 million 2 weeks ago. I know that doesn't make sense either. But when you're preparing to trade everything you've built for your child's life, logic isn't what drives you. Love is. Guilt is. Desperation is. I looked at that duffel bag, sitting on my desk next to Chaik's photograph, and I knew without any doubt that I would have filled 10 bags if they'd asked. 20. 50. I would have emptied every account, sold every asset, destroyed everything I'd built if that's what it took to get Zeke back. Because at the end of the day, none of it mattered. The money didn't matter. The business didn't matter. The empire didn't matter. Only Zeke mattered. He was all I had left. The last piece of the family Chaik and I had started together. The last person in the world who carried our blood, our legacy, our love. And I was going to do whatever it took to bring him home. I was ready to lose everything I'd built. Every single thing. Because what's an empire worth if you lose your soul to build it? What's wealth worth if you're alone at the end? What's success worth if the person you love most in the world is gone? I picked up that duffel bag. Felt the weight of it. $2 million. $2 million to save my son's life. I would have paid it 1,000 times over. And as I stood there in my study, preparing to leave for that warehouse in Apapa, preparing to face whoever had taken my son, I made a promise to myself and to Chaik's photograph on my desk. If I got Zeke back safely, I would change. I would be better. I would put him first. I would stop choosing work over family. I would rebuild our relationship no matter how long it took. I would show him that he was more important than any business deal, any contract, any amount of money. I would prove to him that I loved him more than I loved success. That's what I was thinking as I zipped up that duffel bag. That's what I believed as I prepared to walk out of my house and drive to an abandoned warehouse to meet kidnappers who might kill me anyway. I thought I was about to sacrifice my fortune to save my son. I thought this was my chance to finally choose him over everything else. I had no idea that the real sacrifice I was about to make would be so much more painful than losing money. I had no idea that what I was about to discover would hurt worse than any kidnapping ever could. But before I tell you what happened at that warehouse, before I tell you about those 5 words my maid said that shattered everything, I need to know something from you. Have you ever been willing to give up everything for someone you loved? Have you ever stood at a crossroads where you had to choose between what you built and who you love? Tell me in the comments, because what I'm about to share next will show you that sometimes the people we're willing to die for are the ones who hurt us the most. And if you want to know how this story ends, if you want to know what my maid discovered and how it destroyed me, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the truth I was about to learn was darker than any kidnapping could ever be. I picked up that duffel bag. And I walked out of my study, ready to trade my fortune for my son's life, completely unaware that I was about to discover my son had never been in danger at all. I was standing there, hand on the zipper of that duffel bag, $2 million packed and ready, when I heard a soft knock on my study door. My first reaction was irritation. I didn't have time for interruptions. It was already past noon. I had hours to go before the exchange, but I needed to prepare mentally. I needed to drive to Apapa, find the warehouse, make sure I knew the area. I needed every minute to make sure nothing went wrong. So when I heard that knock, I almost yelled at whoever it was to go away. To leave me alone. That whatever they needed could wait. But then the door opened slowly, carefully, and Ngozi stepped inside. Ngozi, my housemaid. Though that word housemaid, it never felt right for what she was to me. She'd been with me for 15 years. 15 years of watching me work myself to exhaustion, of making sure I ate when I forgot, of keeping my house running when I was too busy to notice anything except my business. Ngozi was 48 years old, though she looked younger. She had kind eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen hardship but hadn't let it make her bitter. She'd come to work for me when her husband died. A construction accident. Familiar story in Lagos. Man working to feed his family, taking risks because the money was good. And then one day he doesn't come home. She'd been left with 3 children and no savings. She'd heard through someone who knew someone that Amara Okafor was looking for household staff. She'd shown up at my door, desperate, willing to do anything. I hired her immediately. Not because I'm particularly charitable, but because I saw something in her that reminded me of myself after Chike died. That determination. That refusal to let tragedy define you. That strength that only comes from hitting rock bottom and deciding you're going to claw your way back up no matter what it takes. Over the years, Ngozi became more than an employee. I put her 3 children through university. All 3 of them. Paid their school fees, their housing, their books. Not because she asked. She never asked for anything. But because I could. Because I remembered what it felt like to struggle. And because somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I was trying to make up for not being there for my own son by helping someone else raise theirs. Her oldest daughter is a nurse now. Her second child, a son, is an accountant. Her youngest just graduated with a degree in computer science. All 3 of them doing well. Building lives. And Ngozi would sometimes show me pictures on her phone, tears in her eyes, thanking me for giving her children opportunities she could never have provided alone. She was family. More family than my own son had felt like in recent years. So when she walked into my study that afternoon, I could immediately tell something was wrong. Her hands were trembling. She was wringing them together in that way people do when they're about to say something they're terrified to say. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. And when she looked at me, really looked at me, I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop even before she spoke. Fear. But not fear for herself. Fear for me. She said, "Ma'am, there is something I must tell you. I cannot let you do this." I was confused. Annoyed, yes, but also confused. Let me do what? How did she even know what I was planning? I'd been so careful. So secretive. No one knew about the kidnapping except me and the kidnappers. I hadn't told anyone. Not staff, not security, not business partners. No one. I started to brush her off. Started to say something about being busy, about needing privacy, about how whatever it was could wait until tomorrow. But Ngozi didn't move. She just stood there, trembling, tears starting to roll down her cheeks, and she said it again. "Ma'am, please. Cannot let you do this. I cannot stay silent. It is killing me." Something in her voice stopped me, made me really look at her. And what I saw frightened me more than the kidnapping calls had. Because Ngozi looked broken. Absolutely broken. Like she was carrying something so heavy, so terrible that it was crushing her. I put my hand down, stepped away from the duffel bag, and I asked her what she was talking about. What couldn't she let me do? What was killing her? And that's when she said the 5 words that destroyed everything. "Ma'am, it's all a lie." I didn't understand at first. What was a lie? What was she talking about? My mind was still on the kidnapping, on Zeke, on getting to that warehouse on time. I asked her to explain, to speak clearly. I didn't have time for riddles or confusion. Ngozi took a shaky breath, wiped her eyes, and she started talking. Started telling me something that at first seemed impossible, then improbable, then, slowly, horrifyingly, started making a terrible kind of sense. She told me that 2 days ago, she'd been cleaning Zeke's old room. The room he'd grown up in. The room I'd kept exactly as it was even after he moved out, moved into that penthouse in Ikoyi. He'd stayed over the previous weekend. He did that sometimes, usually when he wanted something or when he'd had a fight with one of his girlfriends. He'd stay for a night or 2, let me feed him, let me mother him in the small ways he still allowed, and then he'd leave again. Ngozi had been cleaning that room, changing sheets, dusting, the normal things. And she'd found his phone. He'd left it there, plugged in, charging by the bed. She wouldn't have touched it normally. She respected privacy. In 15 years, she'd never once gone through my things, never once betrayed my trust. But the phone kept buzzing. Message after message after message. And she could see the preview notifications lighting up the screen. She saw Chisholm's name. Zeke's friend. Calculated one. The one I'd never trusted. And the preview of the message said something that made her stop. Made her look closer. Practice your scared voice more. She can't suspect anything. Ngozi told me she stared at that message for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Practice your scared voice. She can't suspect anything. Who was she? What were they talking about? She picked up the phone. And here she started crying harder, apologizing over and over. She knew it was wrong. She knew it was a violation of privacy. She knew I'd be angry. But something about that message felt dangerous, felt wrong. And she couldn't ignore it. The phone wasn't locked. Zeke had never been careful about security. Why would he be? He'd never had to worry about people stealing from him. He'd always had me to protect him, to pay for everything, to fix every problem. Ngozi opened the messages between Zeke and Chisholm, and what she found made her blood run cold. She told me she read through everything. Went back days. Back to the day after Zeke and I had our argument about the $5 million. And she found the entire plan. Every detail. Every step. The whole conspiracy laid out in casual conversation between my son and his friends. They'd planned everything. The fake kidnapping. The ransom calls. The distorted voice. The proof of life recordings. Everything. Had started as a joke. Or at least, that's how Chisholm had presented it. The day after our argument, he'd sent Zeke a message. Something like, "Man, your mom is really holding out on you. Maybe we need to make her see how much she needs you. Maybe a little scare would open her wallet." And Zeke had responded. Not with outrage. Not with defense of his mother. But with interest. With curiosity. With "What do you mean?" From there the plan had evolved. Chisholm was the mastermind, clearly. He'd thought through every angle. They'd make it look like a real kidnapping. Professional. Dangerous. They'd demand $2 million, less than half what Zeke had originally asked for. Small enough that I wouldn't hesitate. Large enough to be worth their effort. Dubum knew someone with access to an abandoned warehouse in Apapa. Perfect location. Industrial, isolated, exactly the kind of place real kidnappers would use. Kola, the follower, would be the lookout. Make sure no one was watching when I showed up for the exchange. Chisholm had researched voice distortion apps. Found one that would make him sound mechanical, unrecognizable. They'd practiced the script. What to say to make me afraid. What to say to make me compliant. What to say to make sure I didn't involve the police. And Zeke. Zeke would record the proof of life messages. The scared voice. The begging. The crying. They'd laughed about it according to the messages. Joked about how many takes it would require. Joked about whether Zeke could cry on command or if they'd need to play sad music in the background. Ngozi showed me screenshots. She'd taken pictures of everything with her own phone. Smart woman. She knew I might not believe her without proof. She knew this was going to destroy me, and she wanted to make sure I had evidence. Something concrete. Something I couldn't deny or explain away. I looked at those screenshots. Read the messages in my son's words. Messages where he and his friends discussed how to split the money. Messages where they called me the old woman. Messages where they joked about me finally paying up after being so stubborn about the $5 million. Messages where they discussed how to make the kidnapping believable enough that I wouldn't question it. And then I saw the message that broke something fundamental inside me. The message that Ngozi had highlighted with a trembling finger. The message that made everything clear. Zeke had written, "She owes me this. She's been a terrible mother my whole life. I'm just taking what should have been mine anyway." I stood there, reading those words on Ngozi's phone screen. Reading them over and over. She owes me this. She's been a terrible mother. I'm just taking what should have been mine anyway. For a moment I felt nothing. Complete numbness. Like my body and brain had just shut down to protect me from the full impact of what I was learning. Like I was watching all this happen to someone else. Some other woman who'd built an empire for her son. Some other woman who'd spent 48 hours in agony thinking her child was in danger. Some other woman who'd been willing to give up everything to save him. Then the numbness cracked. And underneath it was rage. Pure burning rage. The kind of rage I'd never felt before in my entire life. Not when competitors tried to destroy my business. Not when people underestimated me because of my gender or my race. Not when I'd had to fight for every single thing I'd built. This was different. This was personal. This was betrayal from the person I loved most in the world. My son. My only child. The boy I'd sacrificed everything for. Had conspired with his worthless friends to extort money from me. Had planned an elaborate, cruel scheme to terrify me. Had recorded fake messages where he pretended to cry and beg for his life. Had laughed about it. Had called me a terrible mother while plotting to rob me. I thought about the last 48 hours. The sleepless nights. The guilt. The memories of every moment I'd failed him as a child. The crushing self-blame. The conviction that maybe I deserved this pain because I'd chosen work over him. The promise I'd made to Chike's photograph that I'd be better, do better. Put Zeke first from now on. All of it had been based on a lie. All of it had been manipulation. All of that agony, that guilt, that desperate fear, had been manufactured by my own son to steal from me. The rage burned through me like fire. I wanted to scream. Wanted to throw something. Wanted to get in my car and drive to that warehouse early and confront him right there. Expose him. Humiliate him. Show him what it felt like to have someone you trusted destroy you. But then the rage cracked too. And underneath that was something worse. Something more devastating than anger could ever be. Heartbreak. Pure absolute heartbreak. Because this wasn't some stranger who'd hurt me. This wasn't a business rival or a competitor. This was my son. My baby. The child I'd held in my arms. The boy I'd worked myself to exhaustion to provide for. The young man I'd given everything to, even when I knew I was probably spoiling him, probably creating problems, probably making mistakes. I'd known I wasn't a perfect mother. God knows I'd known that. Missed too much. Been absent too often. Chosen work over presence more times than I could count. But I'd always believed that underneath everything, Zeke knew I loved him. That he understood why I worked so hard. That he recognized the sacrifices I'd made were for him, because of him, to secure his future. But that message. She's been a terrible mother my whole life. I'm just taking what should have been mine anyway. That message told me everything. He didn't see my sacrifices as love. He saw them as abandonment. He didn't see the empire I'd built as his inheritance. He saw it as something I'd stolen from him by not being present. He didn't see me as a mother who'd done her best under impossible circumstances. He saw me as an ATM who occasionally said no. And worse than that. So much worse than that. He saw me as someone who deserved to be punished. Someone who owed him. Someone it was acceptable to terrorize, to extort, to betray in the most fundamental way possible. I looked up at Ngozi. She was still crying. Still apologizing. Still asking if she'd done the right thing by telling me. And I realized something. This woman who I'd employed, who I'd helped, who'd been in my house for 15 years, had more loyalty to me than my own son. This woman had risked her job, had violated privacy, had made herself sick with worry about whether to tell me, all because she couldn't stand by and watch me be victimized. But my son had laughed while planning to rob me. Thank Ngozi. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hello, me. I told her she'd done the right thing. That she'd saved me from more than just losing $2 million. That she'd saved me from continuing to destroy myself with guilt over being a bad mother to a son who'd never appreciated anything I'd done anyway. I asked her to keep this between us. Not to tell anyone else on staff. Not to say anything to anyone. She nodded. Asked me what I was going to do. If I was going to call the police. If I was going to cancel the exchange. And that's when something shifted inside me. The mother in me, the part that had been willing to sacrifice everything, that part was dying. Burning away in the fire of betrayal and heartbreak. But something else was rising from those ashes. Amara Okafor. Not Zeke's mother. Not Chike's widow. Not the woman who'd spent 48 hours drowning in guilt and self-blame. But Amara Okafor. The woman who'd built an empire from nothing. The woman who'd faced down hostile boardrooms and emerged victorious. The woman who'd spent 30 years proving that underestimating her was a fatal mistake. I hadn't survived 3 decades in the oil industry by being a victim. I hadn't built a billion-dollar company by accepting betrayal quietly. And I wasn't about to start now. My mind shifted. Started working the way it did when I was negotiating a major deal or handling a business crisis. Strategic. Calculated. Cold. The emotional devastation was still there. Still churning underneath. But I pushed it down. Compartmentalized it. I could fall apart later. Right now I needed to think. Zeke and his friends thought they were smart. Thought they'd planned the perfect crime. Thought they'd manipulated me perfectly. Thought that in a few hours, they'd walk away with $2 million and I'd never know the truth. They were wrong. I told Ngozi I needed to make a phone call. Asked her to wait outside for a moment. She left, closing the door softly behind her. And I picked up my phone and called the one person I should have called 48 hours ago. Mr. Ezekiel, my head of security. He answered on the first ring. His voice was cautious. He'd known something was wrong when he'd checked on me before. Known I was lying when I'd said everything was fine. Smart man. Observant man. Loyal man. I told him everything. Didn't sugarcoat it. Didn't try to protect Zeke or minimize what he'd done. I told him about the fake kidnapping calls. About the ransom demand. About Ngozi finding the messages. About the entire conspiracy. Mr. Ezekiel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. No mother should have to face this. Not I told you so, even though he probably could have. Not your son is worthless, even though he probably thought it. Just simple empathy. Simple recognition that what I was going through was a unique kind of pain." I told him I wanted to go through with the exchange. Wanted to meet them at the warehouse. But not alone. Not defenseless. Not as a victim. I could hear the shift in his voice. The professional taking over. He asked me what I wanted to do. And I told him. We spent the next 20 minutes planning. Going through every detail. Every possibility. Every contingency. Mr. Ezekiel would bring a team. They'd arrive early. Position themselves around the warehouse. Hidden. Watching. They'd have cameras, recording equipment, everything we needed to document what was happening. They'd stay back unless I gave a signal or unless things got dangerous. But they'd be there. I would arrive alone as instructed. Carry the duffel bag. Play along. Let Zeke and his friends think their plan was working. Let them show themselves. Let them reveal the full extent of their betrayal while being recorded. And then, when the moment was right, I'd confront them. With evidence. With witnesses. With no possibility of denial or explanation. Mr. Ezekiel asked me if I was sure. If I really wanted to face this. If I wouldn't rather just call the police, let them handle it, avoid the confrontation entirely. But I was sure. Because this wasn't just about the money. This wasn't even just about the betrayal. This was about my son finally learning that actions have consequences. That you can't terrorize the people who love you without facing the results. That I might have been an absent mother, might have made countless mistakes, might have failed him in ways I'd spend the rest of my life regretting, but I was not someone who could be victimized without responding. I'd spent 30 years building power. Building strength. Building the ability to protect myself and control my own destiny. And I'd be damned if I was going to let my own son turn me back into that helpless widow with a toddler and a pile of debt. We finalized the plan. Mr. Ezekiel said his team would be in position by 5 p.m. An hour before the exchange. I told him I'd arrive at the warehouse at 6 p.m. exactly, just as the kidnappers had instructed. He said he'd brief his team, make sure everyone knew the situation, make sure everyone understood that this was personal and sensitive and needed to be handled with absolute discretion. Hung up. Sat there in my study. The duffel bag of money was still on my desk. $2 million. I'd packed it to save my son's life. Now it was bait in a trap to catch him in his betrayal. The emotional shift I'd felt earlier was complete now. The mother in me, the woman who'd been willing to sacrifice everything, was gone. Maybe not forever. Maybe she'd come back later, after this was all over, after the dust settled. But right now, I wasn't Zeke's mother. I was Amara Okafor. And Amara Okafor didn't lose. Called Ngozi back in. She looked at me with those kind, worried eyes. Asked me again if I was all right. If there was anything she could do. I told her she'd already done everything. That her loyalty meant more to me than she could possibly know. That I'd never forget what she'd risked by telling me the truth. And I asked her to do one more thing. To act normal for the rest of the day. If anyone asked where I was or what I was doing, to just say I was handling personal business. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Just normal. She nodded. Hugged me. Surprised me, that hug. Ngozi and I had always been warm but professional. But in that moment she held me like I was family. Like she understood that I was about to walk into something devastating and she wanted me to know I wasn't alone. When she left, I looked at Chike's photograph one more time. Wondered what he'd think of all this. Would he be proud of how I'd built our company? Ashamed of how our son had turned out? Angry at me for my failures as a mother? Supportive of what I was about to do? I never know. Chike had been gone for 30 years. And I'd been making decisions alone for all that time. This would be no different. I picked up the duffel bag. Felt its weight. $2 million. Such a small price for what I'd thought I was buying. My son's life. My son's safety. A chance to prove I loved him more than money. But now I knew the truth. My son's life had never been in danger. My son's safety had never been threatened. And my son had never doubted that I'd pay whatever he demanded. The only thing in danger had been my dignity. My self-respect. My ability to see clearly through the fog of guilt and love. But Ngozi had saved me from that. Had given me back my clarity. Had shown me the truth before I'd humiliated myself by begging my son's kidnappers to please just take the money and give him back. Now I was going to that warehouse with a different purpose. Not to save my son. But to teach him the hardest lesson I'd ever taught. The lesson I should have taught years ago. The lesson that might have prevented all of this if I'd had the courage to deliver it earlier. The lesson that loving someone doesn't mean accepting everything they do. That being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat. That family doesn't give you the right to abuse, betray, or exploit without consequence. I looked at myself in the mirror on the wall of my study. Saw a 62-year-old woman who'd survived her husband's death, built an empire, faced down countless challenges, and was now about to face the biggest challenge of all. Confronting the truth about the child she'd raised. Accepting the reality that sometimes, despite your best efforts or because of them, the people you love most become the people who hurt you deepest. I had about 4 hours until the exchange. 4 hours to prepare mentally. 4 hours to make peace with what I was about to do. 4 hours to transform from a terrified mother into the woman I'd always been when the stakes were highest. A survivor. Fighter. Someone who'd learned a long time ago that in this world, you either control your own story or someone else writes it for you. Zeke and his friends thought they were writing my story. Thought they were the clever ones, the ones in control, the ones who'd pulled off the perfect scam. They had no idea that the story was about to change. That the victim they'd created was about to become something very different. That the mother they'd betrayed was about to show them exactly why you don't underestimate Amara Okafor. Not in business. And certainly not in family. Before I tell you what happened at that warehouse, before I tell you about the confrontation that would change everything between me and my son forever, I need to ask you something. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved, someone you'd sacrificed everything for, had betrayed you in the worst way possible? Have you ever had to choose between the love you feel and the respect you owe yourself? Tell me in the comments, because what happened next was the hardest thing I've ever done. And if you want to see how this ends, if you want to know what I said to my son when I faced him in that warehouse with the truth exposed, subscribe right now. Because the confrontation you're about to hear will show you that sometimes the strongest thing a mother can do is refuse to be her child's victim. I picked up that duffel bag full of money. And I walked out of my study, heading toward a warehouse in Apapa, no longer going to save my son's life, but to save what was left of my own self-respect. I arrived at the warehouse at 5:55 p.m. 5 minutes early. Not late enough to seem suspicious, but early enough to show I was desperate, compliant, exactly what kidnappers would expect from a terrified mother. The drive to Apapa had been surreal. I'd made that journey countless times over the years for business. Apapa is Lagos's industrial heartland. Ports, warehouses, refineries, factories. The backbone of the city's economy. I'd negotiated deals in offices there, toured facilities, inspected operations. But I'd never driven through those streets feeling what I felt that evening. This strange, cold mixture of rage and heartbreak and determination. Mr. Adelik had called me twice during the drive. Once to confirm his team was in position. Once to ask me one more time if I was absolutely certain I wanted to go through with this. If I wouldn't rather just turn around, let him handle it, spare myself the pain of confrontation. But I was certain. Because some things you have to face yourself. Some betrayals require you to look the person in the eye and let them know you see them clearly. Let them know they didn't get away with it. Let them know that love has limits, even a mother's love. The warehouse was exactly what you'd imagine when someone says, abandoned warehouse in Apapa. Massive concrete structure, probably beautiful once, functional, purposeful. But now it was falling apart. Graffiti covered the walls. Crude tags, gang symbols, declarations of love and territory. Windows broken or missing entirely. Weeds growing through cracks in the pavement. The kind of place the city had forgotten about. The kind of place where bad things happened and no one noticed. I parked my car where they'd instructed. Right in front of the main entrance. Got out slowly. The duffel bag was heavy in my hand. $2 million. I'd carried briefcases worth more in contracts and agreements, but somehow this felt heavier. Maybe because of what it represented. Not just money but the death of something. The final destruction of the illusion I'd been clinging to that my son, despite everything, still loved me somewhere underneath the entitlement and resentment. The sun was setting. That golden hour light that photographers love, that makes everything look almost beautiful. But there was nothing beautiful about this moment. Just a mother walking into a trap her own son had set, carrying money he planned to steal, about to shatter whatever remained of their relationship. I walked toward the entrance. The door was partially open. Beyond it was darkness. The kind of darkness that feels threatening, that makes every instinct scream at you to turn around, to run, to get back in your car and drive away as fast as possible. But I didn't run. I walked forward. Into that darkness. Into the warehouse. And I waited for my eyes to adjust. The inside was vast. Concrete floors covered in debris. Old equipment rusting in corners. The smell of motor oil and decay. High ceilings with exposed beams and rafters. I knew Mr. Adelik's team was up there somewhere. Hidden. Watching. Recording everything. But I couldn't see them. Couldn't hear them. I was alone in that darkness. And then I wasn't alone anymore. 4 figures emerged from the shadows. All wearing masks. Black ski masks, the kind you see in movies. The kind that are supposed to be threatening, anonymous, scary. They walked toward me with exaggerated confidence. The posture of people trying to seem dangerous, trying to seem in control. But I knew them. Even with the masks. Even in the dim light. Because I'd known these people for years. I recognized everything about them. The one in front, the leader, was clearly Chisholm. Tall, lean, always moving with his calculated grace, like he was constantly aware of how he looked, how he was being perceived. Even now, even playing kidnapper, he had that same studied quality to his movements. Behind him, Dubum. Shorter, stockier, bouncing slightly on his feet like he always did when he was excited or nervous. The wild one, always chasing the next thrill, the next party, the next adventure. and Cola hanging back slightly. The follower. Always in the background, always going along with whatever the others decided. Never quite present, never quite committed, just riding the wave. And on the left, slightly apart from the others, was my son, Ezekiel. I'd know his build anywhere. His height, his posture, the way he carried himself. 33 years old, and I could still identify him in a crowd with my eyes closed just by the sound of his footsteps. That's what being someone's mother means. You know them at a level that goes beyond sight or sound. You know them in your bones. He was trying to look threatening. Trying to stand like a kidnapper, like someone dangerous. But I just saw my little boy playing dress-up. My little boy who used to pretend to be a superhero with a towel tied around his neck. My little boy who was now pretending to be a criminal, and doing it to hurt me. Chisholm spoke first. His voice was distorted, mechanical, the same voice I'd heard on the phone. Put the bag down. Slowly. I did what he said. Put the duffel bag on the concrete floor. Step back. Played the role of compliant victim. Let them think this was going according to their plan. Chisholm walked forward. Unzipped the bag. Looked inside at the neat stacks of bills. I'd packed them carefully. Made them look official, serious. Exactly what they demanded. He nodded, satisfied. Looked back at the others. Some signal I couldn't quite read, but that clearly meant, we got it, we actually got it, this worked. He zipped the bag back up. Picked it up. Tested its weight. $2 million. I wondered what he was thinking. If he was already calculating his share. If he was proud of himself for pulling this off. If he felt even a flicker of guilt or shame for what they were doing to me. Probably not. People like Chisholm don't feel guilt. They feel entitled. They feel clever. They feel like the world owes them something and taking it is just evening the score. Then he gestured to the corner. And that's when I saw the chair. And Zeke tied to it. Except it wasn't Zeke, of course. It was some bundle of clothes arranged to look like a person from a distance. A mannequin maybe, or just a clever arrangement of fabric and rope. The perfect victim. Head down. Not moving. Exactly what they'd needed me to see to believe this was real. I almost laughed. Almost. Because the absurdity of it was overwhelming. They'd gone to all this trouble. Planned every detail. Voice distortion app. Fake hostage, abandoned warehouse, masks. All of it to steal from me. All of it to terrorize me. And they'd thought I'd never figure it out. Chisholm spoke again. Still using that distorted voice. Leave. We'll release him in 1 hour. Go home. Wait for our call. If you contact the police, he dies. Understand? This was the moment. The moment they expected me to nod, to turn around, to walk away grateful and terrified and obedient. The moment they thought they'd won. The moment they thought they'd gotten away with it. But I didn't move. I just stood there. Looking at them. Looking at my son standing there in his ridiculous mask, probably grinning underneath it, probably thinking he'd finally gotten one over on his terrible mother who cared more about money than him. And then I spoke. My voice was calm. Clear. No fear in it. No panic. Just cold, absolute certainty. Take off the masks. Silence. Complete silence. Even the ambient sounds of the warehouse seemed to stop. No one moved. No one breathed. They just stood there, frozen, trying to process what I'd just said. I said it again. Louder this time. With authority. With the voice I used in boardrooms when I needed people to understand I wasn't asking, I was telling. I said, take off the masks, Ezekiel. The shock rippled through them like electricity. I saw it in their body language. The way they jerked back slightly. The way they looked at each other. The way my son's head snapped up, the fake victim forgotten. His entire attention suddenly focused on me. How did I know? How could I possibly know? They'd been so careful, so clever, so perfect in their execution. Kept talking. Kept my voice steady even though inside I was breaking apart. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was that stupid? That blind? That easy to fool? Now they were panicking. Could see it. The way they shifted their weight. The way their hands moved nervously. The way they looked at each other trying to figure out what to do, how to salvage this, whether to keep pretending or run or try to explain. I reached into my pocket, pulled out Ngozi's phone, held it up so they could see the screen, and I started reading their own words back to them. Each message a knife cutting through their pretense, their scheme, their carefully constructed lie. Practice your scared voice more. She can't suspect anything. Pause. Let that sink in. The old woman finally paying up. Another pause. She's been a terrible mother my whole life. I'm just taking what should have been mine anyway. With each quote I watched them deflate. Watched the reality of their situation dawn on them. Watched them realize that not only had I figured out their plan, but I had evidence. Proof. Screenshots of their conspiracy. Zeke pulled off his mask first. He didn't look scared exactly. He looked shocked. And underneath the shock was something else. Shame maybe. Or anger at being caught. Or both. His face was flushed. His eyes were wide. He looked at his friends, then back at me, then at the phone in my hand. The others followed. Chisholm pulled off his mask slowly, like he was trying to buy time to think. His face was calculating even now, even caught. Trying to figure out if there was still a way to talk his way out of this. Dubum looked genuinely afraid. The wild one suddenly confronted with real consequences. And Kola just looked defeated, like he'd always known this would happen, like he'd been waiting for everything to fall apart. For a moment nobody spoke. We just stood there in that warehouse. For young men who'd thought they were clever, who'd thought they'd planned the perfect crime. And one woman who'd been their intended victim but who'd turned the tables so completely they couldn't even process it. Then Zeke found his voice. And true to form, he tried to bluster his way through. Tried to deflect. Tried to make this somehow not his fault. Mom, I can explain. Cut him off. My voice was sharp now. All the pain and betrayal and rage channeled into words that came out like weapons. Explain what? How you and your friends planned to extort $2 million from me. How you laughed while recording those fake messages where you pretended to cry and beg for your life. How you called me a terrible mother while planning to rob me. How you terrorized me for 48 hours because I had the audacity to say no to you for the first time in your spoiled, entitled life. He flinched. Actually physically flinched. Like my words were hitting him. And maybe they were. Maybe for the first time in his adult life. He was hearing truth instead of indulgence. Hearing consequences instead of excuses. It wasn't supposed to. He was stammering now. The confident, angry man who'd yelled at me 2 weeks ago about being a bad mother was gone. In his place was a boy who'd been caught doing something terrible and didn't know how to explain it away. Pulled out my phone. My own phone this time. And I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mr. Adelic, you can come down now." The floodlights came on. Brilliant, blinding white light that illuminated every corner of that warehouse. And suddenly they could see what I'd known all along. Mr. Adelic and his security team emerging from the rafters, from the shadows, from the positions they'd held for the past hour. 6 men. All of them armed. All of them professional. All of them witnesses to everything that had just happened. And cameras. Multiple cameras. Recording everything. Every word. Every confession. Every piece of evidence that could be used against them if I chose to press charges. Chisholm, Dubum, and Kola panicked. Then. Actually tried to run like they could somehow escape this warehouse. Escape the security team, escape what they'd done. They made it maybe 10 feet before Mr. Adelic's men caught them. Gently but firmly. No violence. No drama. Just professional security work. Hands on shoulders. Instructions to stay still. Instructions to cooperate. But Zeke didn't run. He just stood there. Looking at me. And I stood there looking at him. My son. My only child. The person I'd built an empire for. The person who just tried to steal from me in the cruelest way possible. Mr. Adelic walked over to me. Asked quietly if I was all right. If I needed anything. I told him I was fine. That I just needed a moment alone with my son. He nodded. Gestured to his team to take the 3 friends away. They were escorted out of the warehouse, Chisholm still trying to talk his way out of it, Dubum looking like he might cry, Kola silent and resigned. And then it was just me and Zeke. Mother and son. In an abandoned warehouse in Apapa. With $2 million in a duffel bag between us and the smoking ruins of whatever relationship we'd had left. I waited for him to apologize. To break down. To show some remorse. Some recognition of how badly he'd hurt me. Some acknowledgement that what he'd done was wrong. But he didn't apologize. He got angry instead. Because that's what Zeke did when confronted with his own failures. He got defensive. He got angry. He found a way to make it someone else's fault. You want to know why I did it? His voice was rising now. Getting louder. Getting more hostile. Because you've never been there. You've always chosen work over me. I'm your son and you treat me like a stranger. Like an inconvenience. Like something to throw money at so you don't have to actually deal with me. The words hit me. Course they did. Because they weren't entirely wrong. I hadn't been there. I had chosen work too many times. I had tried to substitute money for presents. I had failed him in fundamental ways. But I was done accepting all the blame. Done letting guilt silence me. Done pretending that my failures as a mother excused his behavior as an adult. I stepped closer to him. Looked him in the eye. And I said what I should have said years ago. You're right. I wasn't there. I worked 18-hour days so you could go to the best private schools. I missed your childhood so you'd never know the poverty I knew after your father died. I built this empire so you'd never have to struggle the way I struggled. So you'd never have to choose between paying rent and buying food. So you'd never have to face the world alone and terrified the way I did at 32 years old with a 3-year-old child and nothing but debt. My voice was shaking now. Not from fear. From emotion. From 30 years of guilt and sacrifice and love and resentment all pouring out at once. And you're right. I wasn't there for your football games. I wasn't there for your school plays. I wasn't there for 1,000 small moments that mattered. But I was working. I was building. I was doing it for you. Everything I built, every deal I closed, every success I achieved, it was all for you. To give you opportunities. To give you security. To give you a life I never had. I could see his face changing. Some of the anger draining away. Something else replacing it. Guilt maybe. Or realization. Or just the slow, painful dawning of understanding that his narrative, his story about the terrible mother who abandoned him, was more complicated than he'd let himself believe. But it was too late. Too late for complicated understanding. Too late for nuance. Too late for me to accept partial blame and let him off the hook because I'd been an imperfect mother. But you're also right about one thing, I continued. I failed you. Not by working too much. Not by building a company. Not by being ambitious or driven or successful. I failed you by giving you everything without making you earn anything. I failed you by letting my guilt about being absent turn into indulgence. I failed you by never saying no. By never making you face consequences. By never teaching you that being my son didn't mean the world owed you whatever you wanted. Took a breath. Felt tears on my face but didn't wipe them away. Let him see them. Let him see what this was costing me. I could call the police right now. Fraud. Extortion. Conspiracy. You and your friends could go to prison. Real prison. Not the comfortable life you've been living on my money. Real consequences for real crimes. His face went pale. I saw fear there now. Real fear. Not the fake fear he'd performed for those recordings. But genuine terror at the thought of prison. Of his life actually being destroyed. Of consequences he couldn't charm or money his way out of. But you're my son. The words hurt coming out. Hurt in my chest. Hurt in my throat. Hurt everywhere. And despite everything, despite this, despite what you've done, I love you. I'll always love you. That's what being a mother means. It doesn't stop just because your child hurts you. I could see hope flickering in his eyes. Hope that I was about to forgive him. That I was about to let this go. That I was about to write it off as a mistake, pay for lawyers if needed, Make it all go away like I'd made every other problem in his life go away. But I won't be extorted. And I won't fund your destruction anymore. The hope died. And in its place was shock. Disbelief. Like he couldn't comprehend what I was saying. I told him the terms. Told him clearly, firmly, with no room for negotiation. He was cut off. Completely. No more allowance. No more credit cards. No more penthouse rent paid. No more car payments. No more access to any account with my name on it. He had 1 week to move out of the penthouse I'd been paying for. 1 week to take his personal belongings and find somewhere else to live. His friends were banned from any property I owned. If I saw them at my house, my office, anywhere I had control over, I'd have them arrested for trespassing. They were done leeching off him, which meant they were done leeching off me. I was setting up a trust fund. A substantial trust fund because despite everything, I wasn't going to leave my only child destitute. But he couldn't access it until he was 40, and only if he could prove, with documentation, with evidence, that he'd sustained himself independently for at least 5 years. That he'd held a job, paid his own rent, lived like an actual adult instead of a perpetual child feeding off his mother's wealth. With each condition I watched his face change. Shock giving way to disbelief. Disbelief giving way to anger. And underneath the anger, finally, maybe, some small flicker of understanding that actions have consequences. That you can't betray the people who love you without losing something. You're my mother. He was yelling now. Actually yelling. You can't do this. You can't just cut me off. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? And there it was. The entitlement. The assumption that being my son meant I owed him everything forever regardless of how he treated me. The belief that family was a one-way street where I gave and gave and gave and he took and took and took and I had no right to ever stop. I looked at him. My son. My child. The baby I'd held. The boy I'd loved. The man who'd just tried to extort $2 million from me by faking his own kidnapping. And I said the hardest words I've ever said in my life. I'm your mother. Which is why I'm doing this. I failed you by giving you everything. By never making you work for anything. By never letting you face consequences. By never teaching you that love doesn't mean unconditional financial support. I'm not failing you again. I turned away. Started walking toward the warehouse entrance. Toward the light. Toward my car. Toward the rest of my life. Behind me, Zeke was still talking. Still yelling. Still trying to make me turn around, make me change my mind, make me be the mother he wanted instead of the mother he needed. You can't just leave. Mom, please. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to live? You're really going to abandon me like this? After everything? After you were never there my whole life and now you're just going to walk away? Every word was a knife in my back. Every plea made me want to turn around. Made me want to take it all back. Made me want to forgive him and fix this and go back to the way things were because at least then I had a son. Even if he was spoiled and entitled, at least I wasn't alone. But I kept walking. 'Cause sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means letting someone you love hit rock bottom because it's the only way they'll learn to stand on their own. Mr. Adelik was waiting by my car. He helped me into the driver's seat. Asked again if I was all right. I told him I would be. Eventually. Maybe not today. Maybe not for a long time. But eventually. He told me he'd handle the rest. The other 3 would be released with warnings. He'd have lawyers draw up formal banning orders to keep them away from my properties. He'd make sure Zeke had the information about the move-out deadline. He'd take care of all the details so I didn't have to. Good man. Loyal man. More loyal than my own son had ever been. I drove home in silence. Didn't put on music. Didn't call anyone. Just drove through Lagos traffic as the sun set completely and night fell. And I thought about everything. About Chaik and the life we'd planned. About the 30 years since his death. About the empire I'd built. About the son I'd raised. About where it all went wrong. I didn't cry during that drive. The tears would come later. Days of them. Weeks of them. grief and guilt and loss all mixed together until I couldn't tell what I was crying for anymore. But in that moment driving home from a papa, I was just numb. Like I'd burned through every emotion in that warehouse and now there was nothing left. When I got home, Ngozi was waiting. She took one look at my face and knew it had gone badly. Knew I'd gone through with it. Knew I'd lost my son even though I'd won the confrontation. She hugged me again, longer this time. And she whispered that I'd done the right thing. That it took courage to love someone enough to let them fail. That I was a good mother even if it didn't feel like it. I wanted to believe her. I'm still not sure I do. The next 6 months were strange. I threw myself back into work like I had after Chaik died. Long hours. Constant meetings. Deals and negotiations and expansions. Anything to avoid thinking about Zeke. Anything to avoid the hole in my life where my son used to be. Ngozi would give me updates. Small things she'd heard through her network. That Zeke had moved out of the penthouse. That he'd sold his luxury cars. That he'd found a job at a telecommunications company. Entry level. Customer service or something similar. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that paid enough to maintain the lifestyle he'd been living. She told me he'd moved into a modest apartment. 1 bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood. Nothing special. Nothing terrible. Just normal. The kind of place normal people lived when they worked normal jobs and made normal salaries. Part of me wanted to check on him. To drive by his apartment. To make sure he was eating properly, managing his money, not struggling too much. The mother in me wanted to make sure he was okay. But I didn't. Because checking on him would be the first step toward helping him. And helping him would be the first step toward enabling him again. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't undo in a moment of weakness what I'd fought so hard to establish. I didn't know if he hated me. Ngozi said he never mentioned me in the rare times she encountered him. Never asked about me. Never sent messages through her. Just silence. Complete, total silence. I didn't know if he was learning anything from this. If he was growing. If he was developing the character and work ethic he should have learned years ago. Or if he was just bitter and angry, blaming me for everything, waiting for me to die so he could inherit the empire without having to earn anything. I didn't know. And not knowing was its own kind of torture. But I did know one thing. I slept better. Not well. The guilt and grief still woke me up some nights. But better. Because I wasn't enabling my own destruction anymore. Wasn't funding someone who hated me. Wasn't accepting abuse because I felt guilty about being an imperfect mother. I'd spent 30 years building an empire from nothing. I'd survived my husband's death when I was 32 and alone with a toddler. I'd conquered an industry that didn't want me, that tried to destroy me, that underestimated me at every turn. I'd faced down hostile boardrooms and market crashes and countless challenges that should have broken me. But my greatest failure and my hardest decision involved the person I loved most. My son. The child I'd sacrificed everything for. The man who'd betrayed me in ways I never imagined possible. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes it means setting boundaries even when every instinct screams at you to forgive and forget. Sometimes it means walking away from someone you love because staying would destroy you both. And sometimes the ransom you refuse to pay is the one that saves you both. Not from kidnappers. But from a toxic dynamic that was killing you slowly. From enabling that prevents growth. From love that's really just fear of being alone. I don't know if Zeke will ever forgive me. I don't know if he'll ever understand why I did what I did. I don't know if in 10 years, 20 years, when he's older and maybe has children of his own, he'll look back and realize that I loved him enough to let him fail. That I cared about who he became more than I cared about keeping him comfortable. But I hope so. God, I hope so. I hope one day he'll call me. Not to ask for money. Not to blame me for his childhood. But to thank me. To tell me he understands. To tell me he's built something of his own. To tell me he's proud of himself in a way he never could have been if I'd kept carrying him. I hope one day we'll sit down together, maybe in Chaik's old study, and we'll talk like adults. Like equals. Like two people who've both struggled and survived and learned hard lessons about life and love and family. I hope one day my son will know that everything I did, the presence and the absence, the indulgence and the discipline, the fortune I built and the fortune I withheld, all of it was love. Imperfect love. Flawed love. Sometimes misguided love. But love nonetheless. I don't know if that day will ever come. But I hope. And while I hope, I keep building. Keep working. Keep living. 'Cause that's what survivors do. We don't quit. We don't give up. We face the pain and we keep moving forward because the alternative is to let the pain win. My name is Amara Okafor. I'm 62 years old. I built an empire from nothing. I survived loss and betrayal and heartbreak. I made mistakes as a mother that I'll regret for the rest of my life. But I also loved my son enough to risk losing him completely in the hope that it might save him. That's my story. That's my truth. And if you've stayed with me through all of this, if you've felt even a fraction of the pain and hope and complexity of loving someone who hurts you, then thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding that sometimes there are no easy answers. No clear right choices. Just imperfect people trying their best and hoping it's enough. And if you found meaning in this story, if it resonated with something in your own life, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to make a choice between what was easy and what was right when it came to someone you loved? Have you ever had to say no to someone even though every part of you wanted to say yes? Share your story. Because we're all walking this path together, trying to figure out how to love without losing ourselves in the process. This is Amara Okafor. And this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go.